Hey, oh wow, it's been a long time since I've stood in a room with people instead of Zoom. It's very nice to see you all. So, hello and welcome to Making Games for Real. So this talk is about making games, about serious real-world topics and experiences, and importantly, making them in a way that's respectful and representative. So here is a little bit about me. My name is Chella Ramanan. I'm a narrative designer and writer, currently working in AAA and the indie space as well. I'm one half of Threefold Games, alongside Claire Morwood, who you see here, who I call my creative kindred spirit. So together we made a game called Before I Forget, which is a narrative exploration game about a woman with dementia. It was released last year. We didn't expect to be releasing in the middle of a pandemic, but we did. And I am also the creative director behind Windrush Tales, which is, or will be, it's in pre-production, a branching illustrated narrative game about Caribbean immigration to the UK, which happened through the 1950s and up through the 1970s. And then finally, which has already been said, but I'm the co-founder of Pock in Play, an organization which I co-founded with Adam Campbell to increase the visibility and the representation of people of color in games as well as in the games industry. Do I have to point it there? Okay. Okay, so a little bit about my games. So Before I Forget, as I said, is a narrative exploration game about an Indian woman with dementia. And it began life at the XX Plus Game Jam in Bristol. And that's when I met Claire for the very first time. And that game jam literally changed my life, because 4 years later, we released Before I Forget, and it was nominated for a BAFTA, which is still a sentence I'm not used to saying, in the category Games Beyond Entertainment, which I guess leads us neatly to this talk. So the other game is Windrush Tales, and it's an illustrated branching narrative about a specific period of immigration to the UK, when people from the Caribbean were invited to Britain to help rebuild the country after the war. Okay, so a little bit about the background of Windrush Tales. So in 1948, about 500 people from the Caribbean arrived aboard a ship called the HMT Empire Windrush, which was a repurposed German ship. And over the next 20 years, that generation of immigrants from what was then called the West Indies became known as the Windrush generation. And they changed the face of Britain, and they became the backbone of institutions such as the NHS, because it was the birth of the welfare state in the UK, and they worked in the transport industries, on London Underground, on the bus systems in cities like Bristol, Birmingham, as well as London. And then they became like sort of integral, they brought integral cultural value to the country in terms of music and sport and the arts and politics. And then in 2018, it was the 70th anniversary of the arrival of the Windrush. And it was revealed that the UK government's hostile immigration policy had been wrongfully deporting and targeting members of this generation. It was a betrayal of the promises afforded to them in 1948, and it became known as the Windrush scandal. And so I'm giving a lot of context to this game because I'm conscious that I'm in Norway and that you may not be aware of this particular part of British history. And in fact, a lot of people in the UK weren't. They didn't know. When we said we were making a game about the Windrush generation, a lot of people didn't know what it was or why they were called that until the scandal. Sadly, it took this awful thing to happen for people to suddenly kind of key into what this game is about. So Windrush Tales is basically the story of 3 immigrants in 1950s Britain navigating a largely hostile and isolating society, and the game is going to explore the different ways those characters try to navigate and thrive in that. So currently it's in pre-production, so I won't be going into that much detail about it, but I can outline some of the early decisions that we've made. So basically this is a talk about two games that are exploring very different topics, but both need a lot of careful thought and consideration. So I'm going to go through some of the stages of things that I found in common in making both of these games. So Before I Forget, we had a lot of media interest, and journalists would always ask us, why are you making a game about dementia? And I think it's a crucial question that developers can ask themselves. So why? Hello, clicker. There we go. Okay, so like I said, Before I Forget was born at the XX Plus Game Jam in 2016. And you can see here some really, really early images of the game. But in terms of why dementia, it was basically, I was a prose writer before. This was the first game I wrote, apart from a little thing I fiddled about with in ink, just to sort of hone the craft and tinker with branching. But this was my first proper game, but I was always writing novels and prose, and I wrote a radio play shortly before this. But I was always interested in memory and what does it mean when you lose your memory. I was interested in sort of amnesia, as like what happens to a person, those sort of building blocks of a personality and a life, what happens when you lose those. So it was something that sort of preoccupied me, and I had notebooks with story ideas in, and one of them was just simply woman with dementia and nothing more than that. And then we got to the game jam, and the theme was borders. And at the time, there was the Syrian refugee crisis, and Trump was threatening to build a wall. So there were lots of border issues going on around the world, and we kind of sort of toyed with some of those ideas. And then I said, well, what if we take it from another angle and we think about psychological borders? And I have this idea for a woman with dementia. Well, it's not really an idea, it's just like a statement. And it immediately kind of clicked for Claire, and we sort of bounced ideas, and as a result of that idea, it was like we immediately had a setting, because we were like, okay, so she's in a house, maybe she's alone, so we're going to have a set number of rooms, because don't forget we were at a game jam, so we had a very limited amount of time to make something, so we needed to bring the scope right down. So we were like, okay, we'll have several rooms, and she walks around, and what if the house is in grayscale, and you can see here in the GIF, so when you interact with an object, maybe color comes back, and that represents her getting her memories back. And that was basically, Before I Forget in a nutshell, that's the gameplay right there. So there were really a lot of reasons why, but they weren't because, journalists asked us that question because they were expecting us to say because we had personal connection, we'd lost someone, and fortunately for both of us, we haven't had that personal experience of dementia. But our reasons why were because memory loss was interesting to us creatively. It fitted the theme of the project, which we happened to be doing at that game jam. And also, it interested us because games don't usually cover this kind of thing. So it was unique, and it was an opportunity for us to have an older woman as a protagonist. It was also an opportunity to explore something that affects a lot of people. Dementia touches too many people, but it isn't represented in games, and we wanted to challenge that, why? And also, it was because, so I had this idea in a notebook for a long time, but I never wrote it. And I think I never wrote it because it was perfectly suited to be a game. I don't think it would be as effective or as impactful if it wasn't a game. So the learning here was, that why doesn't have to be a way to stop you from taking on something that's difficult or challenging, but it's about interrogating your creative motivations behind a project. Okay, so so because it's cool can actually be a valid reason to do something. And so this is a photo of the Agoji warrior women of the Dahomey Kingdom, which is modern-day Benin. Some colonizer actually called them the Dahomey Amazons, so you might know them as that, but we'll move on from that. But anyway, so these like cool warrior women are, a historical fact, and they were the inspiration for the Dora Milaje, the warrior women that you might be familiar with from the Black Panther comics or the film. And so they sound cool, right? It's like understandable. I kind of want someone to make a game about this. It's awesome. And I think that's a fair reason to, that's a good starting point. But you kind of have to have something more than it's cool, because otherwise your game decisions are likely to follow the same reasoning. So you might be like, well, like Benin, is it cool? Do we know anything about Benin? And so you might think, let's take it to Egypt, because everyone knows Egypt. Egypt's cool. It's got the pyramids. It's got, Nefertiti. But then you've kind of divorced this real-world place, this real-world culture, and taken it to the other side of a continent, and you're sort of going off track, and you're actually just appropriating a culture. And then you might go down the road of like, well, their outfits though, are they cool? I mean, maybe we need to give them like sexy outfits, and I haven't got a picture of that because we all know how that goes, and we don't need to see it. But the point is that because it's cool can be a good starting point for you to be interested in something, but it can be a creative slippery slope. And I think you need to, it's another good reason to interrogate your whys of your design decision when you're starting on something. Oh, this clicker doesn't like me. Okay, so regarding Windrush Tales, so the why on that was easy for me because I am a child of Windrush. My father was from Grenada, which is a small island in the Caribbean, and he came to the UK in the 1950s, so he's part of the Windrush generation. And so when it was the 70th anniversary, I was like, I want to do something creative to celebrate this. And I wanted to see the British Caribbean experience represented somehow, and I wanted to represent it. And I was like, shall I write a story? What shall I do? And then I was like, oh, a game would be cool, because I never even see the Caribbean experience in games, never mind the Black British Caribbean experience. And this is a very specific period of British history, and it's specific to me, and I think we deserve to see ourselves represented in this way. So I started making it because it's a story I wanted to see, and nobody else was doing it. And also the fact that this is a story of an odyssey, of people leaving one island, getting on a ship, and going to another island, not knowing what they're going to encounter. And that's just like the seed of so many mythologies and like folklores that we're interested in from all over the world. So why aren't we interested in this one that's actually recent history? Why wouldn't we want to see a game about that? Oh yeah, so this is I think this is my last why slide. Basically, I think video games is an industry. So it's about the connotations that comes with the word games and the idea of play, and it comes with connotations of childishness and frivolity and time wasting just for fun. And I think video games as an industry has a really hard time kind of shaking this off. Criticisms of themes or insensitivities of a game are often met with the mantra, oh, well, it's only a game. But really deep down, we know that it's not, and it's not true. And, well, at least I don't want it to be. And Claire and I, as Threefold Games, we're focused on making games that challenge what games can be and who they're for and who they're about. And so in terms of Before I Forget, for some people that was the first game they'd ever played, and they played it because they were interested in or touched by dementia, or because they wanted to play as an older person, or because they knew that Sunita is Indian. And we made that decision deliberately because I was really tired of not seeing South Asian people represented in games. So we made her our lead. And some people played it also because it was short and there was less hurdle to access for them. So it was kind of, because you can reach lots of people, and why we made it and why Threefold Games continues to look for new perspectives or themes to make into games is because we want to reach people. Oh, clicker. Okay, so the challenge for us for making Before I Forget was to make something that's both an engaging experience and also something that represents dementia sort of respectfully, as opposed to offering a distorted or cliched perception of the disease. So memory loss is the one symptom that I think we all are familiar with and associate with dementia, but as we started making the game and researching the disease, we discovered that everyone's symptoms are different. And researching the symptoms actually gave us lots of ideas for the game. And sometimes they presented new challenges, but sometimes they actually helped us with game design, which I'll go into a little bit later. The first stop was films and mainstream media. So this novel, Elizabeth is Missing, I actually already owned it before we started the game because I was interested in memory, so I bought this novel, and it's basically a mystery novel in which the detective has dementia, and she is looking for her friend, and so it has this kind of Memento style to it, where she has to leave notes for herself because she has short-term memory issues. But it's in first person, and she has agency, and she drives the whole story. So it's not about someone caring for her. So it was a really great starting point for us, and definitely what we wanted to do. So she's the hero of her story, but she's obviously battling with confusion and the anxiety that comes with that, and sort of lost time, and sometimes she slips into the past completely without realizing it, and sometimes she forgets to eat and things like that. So it was just like a really interesting insight into dementia, and also making a protagonist who is still strong and vital, which is what we wanted to do. And then we looked at the film Still Alice. So our protagonist has early onset dementia. Lots of people assume that she's an old lady in her 70s or 80s, but she's not. And she's an academic. And then we found this film, and that's also the central character is also an academic. And it was quite interesting because in one of the scenes where she gets diagnosed, he says that because she functions at a really high intelligence level, she had lots of coping mechanisms, which meant that her symptoms were hidden for much longer, which was quite interesting and could help us sort of justify the fact that Sunita lives alone for so long. So both of these films focus on the character rather than the disease, and that's definitely what we wanted to do with Before I Forget. Oh, yes, and then the other thing that we decided pretty early on was that we didn't want to. So there's this preconception that games are somehow educational tools. I don't know if it's because they're software or something, but we were often asked, like, oh, is this to go into schools, or is this to train people? And so another reason, so one of our reasons, our whys was not education. So we didn't make this game to educate people about dementia. So it's really interesting, like when you're interrogating your why you're making something are the ones that are, it's like, why are you not making it? We weren't making it to be an educational tool. If somebody learns something about dementia from playing Before I Forget, that's great. But that wasn't why we were making it. Yeah, so we were aware, I mean, as a Black woman who consumes media, I'm aware that there is a tendency to use sort of mainstream media as a source of, like a research tool, which we did at the early stages, but then you have to go beyond that, because, I've seen too many times where there are sort of creative projects where I think, all they've done is watch movies or music videos or something to make assumptions about the Black experience. And so we were aware that was something that we didn't want to do, so we didn't want to stop at games, books, and films. So we worked with 2 medical professionals, and we found an organization called Gaming the Mind. And so this is an organization of psychologists who are interested in the intersection between video games and mental health. And it was like they were made for us. It was amazing. So we got in contact with them, and they were really helpful and excited, and they put us in touch with a doctor who specialized in Alzheimer's. And so one of the members of Gaming the Mind and this other doctor, they played builds of the game over, I think it was a period of maybe 2 or 3 months. They're both incredibly busy, obviously, but we do a build and then send it to them, and one of the doctors didn't play games, so it was, like amazing of him. He had to sort of grapple with, getting to grips with this game. And then we'd have a Zoom call or whatever, and they'd give us some feedback. And some of the feedback was really interesting. So like a lot of the things that we had already established, they were like, yeah, this is really, that's really spot on. But one of the notes I got as the writer on the project was, I had a key, and when the player interacts with it, Sunita has a thought about it, and she said, that long metal object. And he said, that's actually not how cognitive function degrades around language. They'd actually remember the function of an object rather than the form. So then I did an editing pass on all those sort of object interactions. So the key became that unlocking thing. And I had a watch that was a round metal object, and that became the time counting thing. So that was a vital piece of information that we might otherwise never have found. And then there were other... So what else? Yeah, so then there was patterned objects. So like a rug on the floor can be problematic for people with dementia because they can hallucinate and see pattern things as a change in surface level. So they might see it as a hole in the ground or feel like they're going to trip over it or something. So that was something we used as well because we had a bit of open plan house. And we didn't want the player to go down it until a certain point. So we put this rug there, and it became this kind of black hole that Sunita just naturally doesn't want to go down. And although a lot of the players didn't understand what that object was, because they didn't know the intricacies of dementia, we were fine with that because a colleague's father who had dementia played it, and one of his notes, he wrote some notes, and he was like, oh yeah, the rug. He's like, I don't have that, but I know some people who do. And I just thought that was a really nice moment of representation for him, that he was the only one who got that, and we thought that was kind of cool. Okay, so you've accumulated all this information about whatever the topic is. For us, it was dementia. So how do you make a game from this? So the first conversation we had was about the tone of the game. Like really early on, we decided, we were talking about video game houses and how we were going to naturally be compared to Gone Home, and just the fact that video game houses are these really spooky, haunted places that you would never want to live in. The Gone Home house is beautifully realized and it feels really lived in, and that was really inspiring for us. But yeah, they need to put some lights on in there. So we decided this is our house, so it's very light and airy and pastel colored, because dementia is scary enough, and we didn't want to present the disease as some sort of supernatural thing that was occurring, like some sort of haunting, because it's not. Dementia is sadly really banal and commonplace. It's not a superpower, it's ordinary and also sad and cruel. And so we wanted to make sure that the house wasn't the tone of the house, because dementia isn't making the house scary, the house is ordinary. I mean, sometimes when Sunita enters a moment of anxiety, then we will change the lighting and things like that, and might sort of increase the shadows. But generally, you'd walk into this house, and I think it's a really nice house, and it's in North London, so it's worth a fortune. So this is about how dementia creates gaps between, so it creates this disconnect between the person who is living with the disease and the people that they are leaving behind. So basically, our realities are not the same. They may not even be experiencing the same moment in time. They may be seeing or hearing things, and we needed to design an experience that reflects these moments. So like I mentioned earlier, Claire created this color spreading technique. And we use this throughout the game in different ways, and it gradually fills in Sunita's world. It represents progress for the player. They can see where they've been, but it also represents Sunita's memories coming back. She has these lucid moments. So the goal in Before I Forget is to find Dylan. But sometimes Sunita forgets that that's the goal, and perhaps she wants a cup of tea instead. But her dementia can obstruct her ability to do something that simple. So to represent lost time and this kind of sense of loneliness, or not loneliness actually, like aloneness, because she is alone here, and to give the impression of Sunita losing time, we have these moments, and not all players, I've seen in playthroughs that not all players find them, but there are these little places where you can interact, you can sit in a chair, or you can go to put the kettle on, and then she has these moments where she just kind of gazes out of the window and time passes, and that's to represent that lost time that you have. But the player is still trying to find Dylan, but Sunita has kind of just like lost this moment. I need some water. It's a long talk. So so we also used full flashbacks and fragmented memories to both tell the story in a more compelling way, but also to represent how Sunita may remember certain events and return to them again and again. She also exhibits compulsive behaviors, which we've used to sometimes clarify the player goal, which is to find Dylan. Or other times we use it to underline the fact that Sunita is an unreliable narrator. So in this scene, you can see like she has a full flashback. So she goes back, and the actual sort of architecture of the flat has changed, and obviously it's the 70s because of that great wallpaper. You can see there's like boxes because they've just moved in at this point. So that's a full flashback moment. And then we have also to represent some of Sunita's. So she basically can misinterpret things. So the player can think something is true, but then Sunita will say something or do something, and then they'll be unclear on like when that actually happened and if it actually did. And we leaned into this to kind of help players feel some of the confusion that Sunita experiences. So we actually, at times, we disrupt the space for players. Sometimes doors don't go where you expect them to. And I think, yeah, and then sometimes Sunita may repeat things or misunderstand where she is, and this also plays into this sort of pervading sense of kind of confusion. So this sequence is, we called it the bathroom loop. So basically, Sunita needs to go to the toilet. She's like, I need to go to the toilet, but she's forgotten where the bathroom is. We had this hallway that had identical doors, and I was always going to Claire, I was like, this is a nightmare, because players are just going to come out of one room and be like, where the hell am I? But then we were like, this could really play into our hands, because we have this scene where we wanted players to have that sense of confusion. So basically, no matter which door the player opens in this, it always leads to the hall closet, which is one of the first rooms or places that you go in the house. And then we placed a picture of a yellow bird directly outside this room so that they'd know when they were getting back to that place, it would be familiar. It's like, oh, there's that damn yellow bird again. And so when it went in a loop, and you basically never make it in time. And in play tests, so when we took it to events, this was our demo, this bit of the game. And players, we'd be like, oh, what did you think? And they'd be like, yeah, it was really good, but how do you get to the toilet in time? Like, what do you have to do? And I was like, she has dementia, so sadly you don't. She's forgotten where it is. And you kind of see this moment where they go, huh. Okay. And so, yeah, I thought that was really interesting because, games all have made this promise to gamers that you start at a low level of competency, and as you progress through a game, you become more skilled and more competent, and then you have super armor and stuff like that. But Sunita doesn't have any of these things. In fact, things will only get worse for Sunita. And so we decided to lean into that and play with sort of player frustration, which is something, we're always taught as developers to, not frustrate the player, but this took a lot of balancing and a lot of iteration, like how many times can we do this loop before, they're just going to be like, it took a lot of time, like how do we get them inside the closet cleanly? It took a lot of work, but I think it was worth it. So I know game devs like a spreadsheet, so you are welcome. So going back to the idea of disconnect between the person with dementia and the observer, and how our realities are not the same, and not even experiencing the same moment in time. This spreadsheet basically shows us that the emotion, the player can be, we sort of realized that the player can be in a different emotional place to Sunita because we have hindsight, because she's not cognizant of everything at all times. So, for instance, she can remember something and it's a happy memory, but the player is actually sad because they know more than she does at this point. So we decided to kind of map this because it helped us with the pacing of the game, and when we were leaning too far into one emotion or another. Let's see, is there a memory that... so basically we put 0 to 10 is like Sunita's anxiety, and then the player is sad to happy. And you can see that, where is a good one? Oh yeah, so the romantic photo, for instance, like she might find that kind of happy, but the player's like, uh-oh, because they have hindsight. And for instance, when she finds a letter on the computer that's from a colleague who's really angry because she messed up a presentation, which is obviously the player recognizes at this point that those were early symptoms of dementia. And she's just like, oh, he's an idiot, I'll phone him on Monday or something. So the player is kind of like, oh, this is really sad because she's forgotten what happened. But yeah, this was an interesting way for us to kind of help with the pacing of the storytelling. So I think I'm going to finish really early, but okay. So yeah, just a little bit about short games and accessibility, basically. And I think the industry kind of undervalues short games. We found that, so Before I Forget is only an hour long, and we think that's the right length for Before I Forget. I don't think anyone wants to play a 3-hour Before I Forget game. But we found it difficult with investors to get investment in such a short experience because they want to hit certain price points and things like that. But I think we can, short games can deliver these sort of very intense, personal, intimate experiences. And like I said, this is also the first game that some people had ever played. And I think the fact that it was short had something to do with that because, a lot of people don't have 80, 100 plus hours to put into these, beautiful, sprawling AAA games that I enjoy, as well as the short indie games I can play in a weekend. But I think maybe there's something AAA can learn from short games and giving these sort of exit points for people, and also sort of re-entry points, so that if you go away to live your life and look after your children or something, you can come back to a huge game, and you don't have to sort of reach for a wiki to remember what the hell happened. So yeah, just a little one for short games. Okay, so my final wrap-up is basically Before I Forget is a love story and a mystery, but it's also an attempt to explore a difficult topic in a medium that's often dismissed as frivolous and incapable of presenting anything other than violence led by white men as the heroes of their own story. But we made a game about an Indian woman who is a scientist. She's a wife, a daughter, a friend, and someone who had dementia. And her story is just as vital and engaging, and a game was exactly the right medium to tell her story. No other medium can put you in her shoes in quite the same way. No other medium can sort of shift to three-dimensional space beneath your feet in a way that can sort of represent even part of what Sunita's day might be like. And that's why we made Before I Forget. So I hope this helps you find your why to make that game that tackles something difficult and to tell that story that needs to be told. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Chella. Do we have any questions anyone would like to ask Chella regarding talk? Yeah, there's people coming up. I just wanted to say myself, it's just invaluable what you're doing. I appreciate this so much, actually, giving people a chance to be in the shoes and see something from a perspective that they just would never get to experience. And having a South Asian husband and a mixed race daughter, you just do not see South Asian characters in video games at all. I mean, black characters are rare enough, and when they are in games, the representation isn't great a lot of the time. Yeah. So it's just, I hugely appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Is there any questions?
Hi.
Hey.
My question is just when you were testing your game, because I know recently I test a game, and I'm also in game school doing a master's, and we're often like when we are testing is often kind of blend the same people that you are testing, and they're very giving you gamey feedbacks. And when I often test to people that are outside of games, I kind of like love the feedbacks, like they pay more attention to some details that I'm not well aware. I just wanted to know how when you were testing your game, like how the audience were changing, and how would you like pick some things that you were like, oh, this is actually interesting, or no? Like what was the experience when testing the game?
Yeah, so I mean, the main non-gamer was the doctor, and when our very first event was actually a local Comic Con, which was at the top of my road, and I was like in Somerset, sort of in rural England, and I was like, this is not going to be our audience for the Dementia game where you like an old lady where you had to read a lot, kids, have fun, whilst there's Wookiees walking around and stuff. But we were like, it's just like the table was free, and so we thought, well, at least we can like find some bugs maybe or something. So we took it, and we basically underestimated our audience, which investors did along the way. So it was a good early lesson because the demographic was quite young. So there were kids there who were like, I don't know, like maybe 12 or 13 or something, and they loved it, and they went away and brought their friends back, and so we got so that was a good lesson. That just because because like kids know old people too, they they love old people. You have grandparents and things, and there's this assumption that kids can't relate to anyone like I don't know above 16 or something, which we found wasn't true. And then the black hole rug element was actually from a woman who played the game at this con, and she worked in care, and she came and she was like, oh, you couldn't have that rug in the house, and yeah, so there were lots of things. And then some of the things that we were doing right, like people would play the demo, and some people were like crying, and they were like, oh, this reminds me of my grandfather, or it's like, I don't think I'd be able to play this, but thank you for making it. And so I think partly it made us take it, we had this duty of care to do it well. That's what we found from the feedback we got at events. I hope that answers your... Hey.
Hi. You mentioned the trouble you've been having with investors, publishers, to justify a short game and a game that's kind of emotionally experimental, and I'm working on the similar kind of game myself, and I was wondering if you have some advice on that. How did you actually, or have you turned people around to it?
Yeah, so the problem wasn't that they weren't interested in the game. So we found that people like really responded really positively to the game, but they couldn't justify the investment if they were like from big publishers, for instance, because of the length. And so then for a time we did try to, it was like, oh, like we have to make it 2 hours. And so we tried doing that. And then I said to Claire, and I was like, what are we doing? This is like, we're going to go way off track. So I don't know if it's the best advice, but we just decided to make the game that we wanted to make, and not try to cater to, some like whatever, I don't know, mythical investor model was or something. And I think I have a feeling that the landscape's changed quite a lot, actually, from being in pre-production with Windrush Tales. I feel like there's more smaller pots of funding that are available because people are talking about this more, the sort of how hard and how the gates are so firmly shut on investment. So yeah, like going into Windrush Tales, we feel like it's different. There's more pots of money out there. So I guess, I don't know what my advice would be, like maybe, yeah, ask other indies, because they might know what's floating around out there. If you know an indie dev who is good on the business side of things, sort of just have a chat to them and pick their brains, basically, is my advice.
Hi. It was a very interesting talk.
Thank you.
Memories, fascinating. So you mentioned player agency and you trying to convey a specific narrative experience and how you had to balance that. I would love to hear how you tried to balance that, what kind of methods you used. And then a follow-up question, what was easiest to implement and what did you wish you could have implemented but maybe did not manage to?
I think for me, one of the things I wish we'd implemented was if you interacted with an object again, that she'd say something different, and it would maybe undermine what she'd said before, or that we had time and resources to add that extra layer of narrative would have been nice. What was the other question? There were so many questions there. Like, what was the easiest thing to implement? I guess probably the interacting with the objects and those memories triggering. But then it became about where to place those objects. So we moved the objects around a lot to make sure the flow of the game worked well. And then there was another question.
First was, what methods did you use to balance the agency versus the narrative experience?
Okay, yeah. So the player agency. Well, I suppose it's a linear, like non-branching story. So it's not really about it's not about open world player agency. Yeah, I guess the player agency in that way is limited, but that's what you expect from that kind of game, because your reward isn't agency and exploration in that way. I suppose it's a little bit of exploration and your reward is story. Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you for the talk. A bit of maybe a personal question. This is a game that's clearly personal to you, and also your upcoming game, and clearly made with a purpose. And you talk about the disappointment of not getting investors to like buy in on it. How do you deal with disappointment when you so much believe in what you're making, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so there was a point, because there was this period where we were like, people really like this game, so the next thing is, and then like going to events is expensive, and we can't afford a character artist or whatever, so we need funding. So we were like, okay, let's go to arts funding, because it's kind of an arty game. But then arts funding was like, oh, but this is like a game, right? And we're like, arts? And so we were like, okay. And so like, we went over here and we were like, hey, we've got this game funding person. And they were like, it's a bit weird and it's short and like, we love it, but, and so it was demoralizing. And I think we hit a real kind of creative low, because we weren't actually creating, we were filling out these like essays on like to justify why somebody should give us some money, small amounts of money really in games terms, in funding terms. And at some point we were like, this is the last one, that's it. Yeah, I think it was the arts one was like, this is a game. It's like, but you listed games on the relevant thing. And so we were like, okay, we're done. We're just going to make as much of a game as we can with our own funds. And that's how we dealt with it, was just to, carry on. And it did get low. I think Claire and I, the partnership really helped. Because when I was down, she'd be up, and it really worked like that. I love the partnership I have with Claire. And then at some points I was like, is this game utter, lunatic? Like, what are we doing? I just like hit this low. And I only said it to Claire after we'd launched, and then she was like, oh yeah, I thought that. And it's like, but neither of us told the other because we didn't want to kill the momentum. So yeah, the partnership really helps.
Well, I'm really glad that you didn't give up, because I've played Before I Forget, and it's just one of the most impactful games I've ever played. It's incredibly intelligent in the way that it uses game mechanics to represent the dementia, increasing dementia of the main character in a similar way that Memento, which you mentioned, uses the film structure to show what it's like to have short-term memory. And I just thought it must be very difficult from a narrative design perspective to create. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your narrative design process before I forget.
Sorry if I could just cut in, if we could do that fairly quickly. We will need to cut off. Sorry,
might have to
30 seconds. No,
might have to answer this one in the bar, but I think that it was just a lot of iteration. It slowly came together, and I think the final scene, like the final scene in the living room, was broken for the longest time, and I didn't know why. And like I'd get a fresh build, and they'd have done all this cool stuff, and I'd be like, that's good. I was like, but the ending is still broken. They were like, no. I always felt bad feeding back to the team. I was just like, yeah, I don't know why. And then we just had this brainstorming session, like physically together, because we did a lot of the game remotely as well, and it was amazing how being together. And yeah, I had a big bit of wallpaper, like sort of like blank wallpaper, and I was drawing stuff, and that was partly how we fixed it. We just like sat down, had lunch in my garden, and yeah, sort of brainstormed our way out of that pit. Is that short enough?
That's great. Cool. And thank you so much, Chella, for absolutely fantastic.